at something of a crossroads in the automotive industry, a crossroads that's been building for the past few years. On one side, most of the world's major nations are pushing towards a lower and zero-emission future. Some have committed to national net zero targets. Others are at least nudging the industry firmly in the direction through regulation and policy. And then there's the United States, where the federal government is, once again, pretending decades of settled climate science are somehow optional, where anthropogenic climate change is treated as a matter of opinion instead of the conclusion of world-leading research, where politicians claim in official proceedings that more CO2 is somehow better for crops, that drill baby drill is serious energy policy, wind turbines are villainized, and electric vehicles are framed as a threat rather than a tool. Quietly, and not so quietly, encouraging this reversal are automakers who, petulant in their reluctance to dump the pump, are capitalizing on the shift in US policy to argue that they could never possibly go all electric, just scant years after standing on auto show stages and in shareholder meetings promising to do exactly that. In the middle sit consumers, split into various camps. Those who've tried EVs and won't go back to internal combustion. Those who haven't tried one and are convinced they won't work because a politician or a cable news segment told them so. And those who might make the switch tomorrow if automakers and governments were actually serious about making them feasible for everyone. These groups, of course, are frequently cited as the real reason EVs won't catch on, and yet, even amid this pullback rhetoric, EV sales continue to grow in most global markets, which makes one Western automaker particularly interesting. Ford, a company that, just a few months ago, cancelled what was at the time the best-selling electric pickup truck in the US, pivoting instead to a range-extended version. A company that has written down a substantial chunk of its EV investment to date, and yet also a company that has pushed forward with its skunkworks-developed EV platform that it claims will let it compete with the collective might of Chinese EV makers. Earlier this week, Ford provided an update on that universal EV platform and introduced what it calls its bounty hunters, team members rewarded for making smarter design and engineering choices, even if a part costs more up front, to save money and improve efficiency long term. On the surface, it's encouraging to see continued EV investment from Blue Oval, but from the perspective of someone who's covered this industry for more than 2 decades, there's also a sense that much of what's being promised by Ford isn't especially new. So today, I'm going to look at what Ford actually shared, ask where we've all heard it before, and consider whether this is Ford finally absorbing the lessons of the past few decades, quietly hedging its bets, or genuinely building something different. At this point, it would be really disingenuous for me to not note that I am in fact a Ford customer. I've owned not one, but 2 Ford F150 Lightning EVs, and just last week, my current Lightning escaped, mostly unscathed, from being rear-ended in California. I am one of the roughly 90 to 100,000-ish people around the world who parted with hard-earned cash to own the now discontinued pickup. And while I don't love its size for everyday driving, it has been the perfect workhorse for me. It's hauled wood, hauled animal feed, hauled this channel's camera gear from place to place, and it's provided backup power to my house during not so infrequent rural power cuts. And yes, I am still sore that Ford cancelled it. That said, it's not to say it doesn't have its faults, because it absolutely does. It was too expensive. It's too large for most people. And holy heck, why does its slab-like front end have to sit so high off the ground? That height obscures pedestrians, wheelchair users and animals from detection by the driver, and as crash data has repeatedly shown, taller, flatter front ends tend to worsen outcomes for vulnerable road users, not improve them. Which, by the way, is one reason I'm so interested in what Ford claims it's been cooking up in the form of a mid-sized, more sensibly designed EV. But my personal frustration over the F150 Lightning now officially in the open, I should put my journalist hat back on, because I do think that Ford's direction with its new universal EV platform does deserve some serious consideration. If Ford can follow through, and actually bring to production what it says it will, actually do that, this could materially improve its position in the EV marketplace. So with that in mind, let's go through what we're going to look at today. First, I'm going to give you a quick reminder of what we already knew about Ford's UEV platform before this week's video, then a rundown of what we learned in the latest update, then we'll connect it to ideas we've heard before, and ultimately ask whether any of this will actually pay off for Ford. Let's go to the history. Last year, at a special event live-streamed from Louisville, Kentucky, where Ford's first low-cost EVs will be built, Ford CEO Jim Farley laid out the company's plan for a low-cost modular platform designed to underpin an entire family of vehicles, including a new mid-size electric pickup truck and many more models. Unlike Ford's previous electric trucks, which shared architecture with their gasoline counterparts, Farley and other execs reiterated that this would be a clean-sheet, unibody design built specifically for electric, with as many shared components as possible across multiple UEV models. On top of the platform would sit a range of body styles: pickup, SUV, hatchback, even coupe, and Farley openly credited his time studying Chinese EVs, including driving their Xiaomi SU7, as a catalyst for rethinking how Ford builds electric cars. Ford, as he put it at the time, was done with good college tries. Instead, Ford wanted to compete head-on by adopting some of the methods that have allowed Chinese manufacturers to move so quickly and gain such a market leadership. A ground-up engineering approach, a smaller and more agile cross-disciplinary team, and a focus on system-level efficiency and total cost optimization, not just shaving pennies off individual components. While some of that may have sounded revolutionary at the time to traditional automotive types, it wasn't exactly new to EV fans. EV-only and EV-first companies like Tesla, Rivian, BYD, and so many others have been aggressively reducing wiring complexity, eliminating unnecessary parts, and rethinking vehicle architecture from first principles for literally years. That was then, before the Lightning was cancelled. Now to what we learned this week. Called by Ford one of its most audacious and important projects in its history, the UEV makes some pretty big promises, most notably in how it's being developed. But first, can we just acknowledge that the livestream, entitled Ford Bounty Hunters, The Pursuit of Efficiency, was produced more like an Apple presentation than a traditional automotive broadcast? On-screen talent, some of the engineers behind the new platform, were polished and engaging with plenty of fancy camera work. Narration flowed like a tech keynote, with specialists handing off to one another as they outlined problems before revealing their solutions. Instead of standard vehicle shots, we got engineers actively solving big challenges, plus computer-generated visuals to illustrate their ideas. And no criticism from me, it actually worked. It was refreshing and very different to what we've seen from Ford thus far. All of that makes sense. This platform wasn't designed the traditional Ford way. Instead, it relies on software-based engineering principles where clean sheet thinking and innovation take priority over doing it this way because we've always done it this way. That focus on efficiency was evident throughout the presentation. We were reminded that EV battery packs still account for roughly 40% of a new EV's total build cost, and that Ford is actively working to reduce that. But the team at Ford's skunkworks pursued a more holistic approach, make the UEV platform itself as efficient as possible. At the core of this idea are what Ford calls bounties. And no, this isn't Dog the Bounty Hunter. It's a framework for engineering teams to hunt down ways to reduce waste and increase vehicle efficiency. The bigger the impact a system has on EV range, the larger the bounty assigned to reduce or eliminate its effect. And the larger the bounty, the more reason engineers could leverage to, for example, replace a cheaper but less efficient part with a smaller, more efficient but also more expensive one. And no, I'm not entirely sure why Ford chose this particular term, but it did. From cavities under the vehicle to holes in its structural elements, the engineers hunted down every possible efficiency tweak, just like a Formula One team seeking a few extra thousandths of a second on a lap time. The as-yet unnamed pickup was designed to create as clean an aerodynamic profile as possible. Granted, it's no Aptera, but some clever adjustments include aligning the rear wheels in the aerodynamic wake of the front wheels, effectively eliminating them from drag calculations, and curving the cab's roofline towards the centre before sweeping back at the tailgate, a more car-like shape that smooths airflow over the vehicle, creating an almost virtual camback for the entirety of the pickup bed. Even the mirrors were tweaked. Instead of the multi-motor adjustment system found in most conventional vehicles, the entire mirror housing now moves with a single motor, not the glass inside it. And this is an interesting one. Ford claims these mirror changes alone improve range by up to 4.5 miles. If you've ever driven an F-150 of any type, you'll know that the stock mirrors are massive and very unaerodynamic, something Aptera likes to joke about. In fact, Steve Fambro, Aptera co-founder and co-CEO, likes to tell people a stock F-150 mirror has more drag than an entire Aptera. And having driven with mirrors folded versus extended on the F-150 Lightning, I kind of believe him. These mirror tweaks give Ford a 4.5 mile range improvement, and similar small adjustments are applied throughout the vehicle, producing what Ford says is a 15% more aerodynamic design than any other pickup to date. Beyond aerodynamics, the team also made broader changes to reduce overall vehicle weight, further boosting efficiency. The video emphasises what Ford describes as obsessive attention to savings, including lowering the drivetrains closer to the ground, making bearings, joints and drivetrains more efficient by treating them like a race car's system, with the goal of minimising internal mechanical drag. Electronics weren't neglected either, with Ford saying it's improved the UEV platform's power electronics, including its regenerative braking, beyond what current and recent EVs in its own lineup can deliver. I will carry on my explanations from the event in a moment, but first, did you know that we're here because of our amazing community of supporters on Patreon, YouTube, Discord, and Ko-fi? Unlike a lot of channels out there, we're not big, we don't take big advertorial sponsorship deals, and we only still exist because you all support us. There's a link in the down below on how to join and become a member, plus links to our channel on the Fediverse, because in addition to being independent, we also think that everyone should have free federated access to information without being tracked. Back to Ford. Chassis design was also heavily revised for UEV. As Ford detailed last year, the company is following in the tyre tracks of other automakers by moving to a unibody construction, reducing more than 140 chassis components from the current Ford Maverick to just 2 for this new unnamed pickup. I will come back to the uniqueness or not of this design decision later, but it's worth noting here that people online are already debating the structural rigidity and practicality of gigacastings for a pickup truck, especially one intended for towing. The jury is still out, and not all insurance companies like massive castings since they can increase repair costs. That said, if a vehicle is dramatically cheaper to build and potentially replace, some of those companies may accept the trade-off of higher repair costs. Also, for my US viewers, most of the world has no issue for unibody construction. It's really only in the US that skepticism remains. To be fair, I would worry more about ground clearance than construction type, but that's just me. The jury might be out on towing, but what most certainly should be commended, however, is Ford's insistence on parts flexibility and component reduction. As the company learned with the early Mustang Mach-E, EVs can contain a lot of cooling and wiring that, without careful planning, become a veritable rat's nest. I mean, just look at some of the early Munro and Associate teardowns of the MME to see how little optimization was applied in that vehicle at its launch. So for this new platform, a ground-up approach meant adopting the best part is no part mentality and if one part can do two things, great. Led again by the bounty hunter mindset, Ford's skunkworks team dramatically reduced complexity throughout the vehicle. They cut raw part count, reduced weight, and improved efficiency. Wiring now uses a zonal system that Ford says is 22 pounds lighter than its first EVs and operates at 48 volts instead of 12. I'm not going to get ridiculously deep here, but higher voltage cabling for lower voltage systems, or rather, using a higher voltage for lower voltage systems, i.e. 48 volts instead of 12 volts, for example, actually improves overall system reliability and reduces energy losses. It's a bit more complex than that, but for now, that's enough to know. The wiring improvements aren't the only innovation. The battery pack itself features a flexible one-piece PCB for inter-battery power connections across high and low voltage circuits, which replaces traditional heavy copper bus bars and a whole tangle of individual low-voltage wires. The cells are LFP chemistry rather than NMC, and because the battery pack is also structural, Ford says it should also improve driving dynamics. Do we have a name for this vehicle? No. Do we have a launch plan? Sort of, sometime next year. A price? Only the $30,000 target Ford has been bandying about quite enthusiastically for some time. But many unknowns remain. Ford is keeping this one close to the chest, and honestly the video feels more aimed at institutional investors than any end users. Taken in that context, and given that Ford reported a significant net loss in 2025, in fact one of its weakest financial performances since the Great Recession, largely driven by EV-related charges and write-downs, the timing of this particular announcement and video is notable. So, is this all new? No. There's plenty here that shows promise for the Blue Oval, but this isn't about revolutionary ideas. It's about Ford picking up and running with what others in the industry have already accomplished. From Xiaomi to Audi, Tesla to BYD, and many other firms beside, structural battery packs are already standard fit items in 2026. LFP battery chemistry is now becoming the standard go-to, especially for cars that prioritize cost and battery lifespan over high performance and peak power. In fact, I predict LFP will soon be the dominant battery choice worldwide, and it already is in China. How about the low voltage wiring? Again, not new. Fewer automakers, frankly, are adopting 48-volt zonal low-voltage systems than are, for example, using LFP cells, but it is still a growing trend, and Tesla has been using 48 volts for years, and many mainstream automakers are now adopting it for hybrids and some other models. And in China, 48 volts is becoming a new standard. Unicasting and gigacasting? Yeah, already spreading fast. Fewer parts means faster assembly, more rigid structures, and less to go wrong. And as I noted earlier, massive castings can complicate accident repairs, but in a world where leasing is increasingly the norm and ownership for many is unaffordable, repairability looks like it may take a back seat to lease income. Aerodynamics? Again, really not new for EVs or in fact mainstream cars, but still relatively fresh in the pickup truck segment. Ford's new midsize EV is set up like a Maverick, which will work for many buyers. That said, that lower ground clearance may be a big issue for anyone living outside of the city. But for me, the standout engineering move, that is the printed flexible multi-layer PCB replacing traditional bus bars. Now that is also not new globally. Some Chinese automakers have done this for a while, but it is new for Ford and I think new for most non-Chinese automakers. Overall then, nothing Ford has presented so far is groundbreaking or revolutionary. And while Ford is selling this as a Model T moment with all of the fanfare of a moving production line, I don't think that's entirely fair. But yes, for Ford, this is still big news. But will it pay off? That is a multi-million-dollar question. Literally. Some people will already be yelling in the comments that Ford is useless and will never pull it off. Others will be waving the Ford banner saying that this is the best thing since, well, the Model T Ford. Me? I'm on the fence. Ford has burned a lot of bridges in recent months, cancelling the F-150 Lightning, shifting attention back towards hybrids and gas guzzlers, and focusing less on EVs. But just this week, CEO Jim Farley reportedly spoke with the Trump administration about working with Chinese EV firms in the US. Now, Canada has already made smart moves to allow Chinese EVs into its marketplace, but the US for now still bans most Chinese EVs and Chinese EV tech. And Farley wants to leverage some of Chinese EV tech smarts in US-made vehicles, which of course is controversial politically. He's still pushing for EVs in the future, but it's less clear now than it was 2 years ago. And with the first UEV models not slated to enter production until next year, long after this fall's midterms, Ford does seem to be playing something of a strategic waiting game. Yes, I personally still believe that Ford cancelled the F-150 Lightning for partly financial reasons and partly due to White House political pressure. After all, President Trump really, really hates everything green, wind turbines, solar panels, and EVs. But I also think that Ford's executive team is clearly aware that, come November, if the polls are right, we could have a lame duck president and, assuming Donald Trump doesn't try to invalidate the election, something which, let's face it, is a real concern right now. Bloody hell, I never thought I'd have to say that in a video. We could see a more favourable US EV policy reset. Is it a clever business move? Maybe? Is it a game changer? I remain to be convinced. Is Ford all in on EVs? Unfortunately, like so many other major automakers, only if it can make a profit. And that, unfortunately, depends heavily on political currents. Time to make sure you're registered to vote if you're a US citizen. Thanks for watching to the end. If you made it this far, let me know in the down below what your favourite EV pickup to date has been, and if you are in the market for a new EV, would you consider buying a mid-sized $30,000 EV pickup? Or would you prefer something even smaller, like a Tello? We are 100% independent, and if you'd like to help us stay that way, there is a link in the down below to support us on Patreon from $1.50 a month, so you can join the list of long-standing amazing channel supporters right here. You can also send us money on Ko-fi, buy some swag from our swag store, like this phenomenal t-shirt, and if you want to subscribe, please hit subscribe. YouTube is not going to reliably tell you when we've pushed a new video though, so make sure you also follow us on the socials or join our Discord chat room. Thanks for watching, thanks for helping be the positive change in the world, and until next time, keep evolving!